Well, I'm glad to introduce Dr. Lee Harman. I got to know him, I think, in 1986 when he came to town right out of, I think, just out of the U.S. Navy. And I've grown up with him. And as we all know, he's had a very successful business he developed here in town and does a lot of things for Rotary and is a real Rotarian. So without any more, I present to you the Honorable Dr. Lee Harman.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, okay, now how come that didn't happen? Well, let's see here. I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to do this. I'm working on it, everybody. Okay, there we go. Slideshow. And let's go slideshow and let's go to play from start and let's max. Ah! You can teach an old dog new tricks, turns out. Happy to be here to talk about my adventure, the adventure Don and I had while flying. And this is kind of how it looks when you're coming in to make an approach to land. Gear down, flaps down, runway clear. We're all set for landing. This is a picture that, or a plaque that's in my house that my wife makes me look at quite often. She also shows all the people that come to our home, you know, that there is a normal person living there. It's not me, however. How do I remove the pictures on the right-hand side of my screen?
Click the little small blue button at the right top.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, there, that's better. So a pilot and a normal person lives on Camino Island. Okay, now it's not, that's interesting. Let's see what I can do down here. So as it turns out, I'm a pilot. Yes, I'm proud of that fact. Why, yes, I fly. And as does Bucky and Pete and even Don Richards, my cohort in this escapade. And for clarity's sake, I've been flying since 1978 with a private license, and before that I flew in the Navy, but I always had an RP, a real pilot, next to me, so I don't count any of those hours. But as a Navy flight surgeon, you have to fly to maintain proficiency, so you know what the guys are up to. And so I have a lot of time in various tactical airplanes that the Navy had at the time. They're all mothballed at the moment, though. That's how far back they go. In fact, the F-14 was a brand new airplane when I became a flight surgeon. So yes, I have about 3,000 hours and 300 hours in floats, a whole bunch of time in tail draggers. And I'm an instrument rated pilot, and I have certifications for flying multi-engine and single engine airplanes on land and sea. There aren't many seaplane pilots with multi-engine time. And you may remember I had a plane with 2 engines on it called an Aircam, best airplane in the world prior, and really enjoyed flying that airplane. So that's kind of my history of flying. I've been flying privately then since 1978. And on the left-hand side, the right-hand side are some of the planes I've had, not all of them. The Aircam's down at the bottom, but I'd direct you to Theodore Roosevelt, one of my heroes. And he wrote something about daring greatly. And it's essentially, it's a dedication to somebody standing in the arena, and whether you win or lose or draw, you're in the arena trying, and you don't give up. And you want to read this whole thing sometime, look it up, Daring Greatly by Theodore Roosevelt. And it's one of the things I somewhat live by. But this is a sign that my wife gave to me many years ago, and she doesn't worry about my flying at all. And, you know, in jest, she'll say, well, if he goes out, if he doesn't come back from flying someday, it's the way he wanted to go. And that's probably true. Be quick, that's for dang sure. But this plaque is it's in the bedroom. Well, more specifically, it's in the bedroom bathroom, and or the master bathroom. And very specifically, it stands behind a unit everybody uses most every day. And some guys like me use it a lot. So I have to look at this, and it's the picture of a World War I French airplane in the boughs of a tree. And I always thought it was Photoshop, but when you look really closely at the bottom, there's actually people staring up at this, and so it's an actual picture. And of course, I get to look at the inscription. Aviation is in itself is not inherently dangerous, but to an even greater degree than the sea, it's terribly unforgiving of any carelessness, incapacity, or neglect. And I have found that to be true on a number of occasions. So it was a beautiful day for flying. Absolutely gorgeous. We call it CAVU, Ceiling and Visibility Unlimited, CAVU. And I am a squeaky clean pilot, and I take it really seriously. So all the paperwork for the airplane, all my time and hours and biennials and all the things you have to do to be a competent pilot, I have done. And I did a complete check of the airplane, and I also looked at all the paperwork. I even got we have to have, as a seaplane pilot, we have to have a special designation that it's called aircraft invasive species, and they don't want us to fly into lake to lake and bring things in like mussels and other stuff that you're not supposed to. You don't want that to get into, and milfoil's another one. So anyway, I was squeaky clean on this flight. Everything was in order. A 30-minute pre-flight with Don at the restaurant where we had breakfast, and we planned to do a sack lunch to a fly-in, an official sanctioned fly-in at Float Haven in Bellingham, Washington. And then we talked about the route of flight, and we discussed safety issues, and that we were going to do one landing at Menifee's Big Lake, and then we're going to go up and do 2 more splashes on the south end of Lake Whatcom, which is a really long lake, so it's easy to do. And I was going to demonstrate to Don what it's like if you're overweight in an airplane, seaplane, where it won't come up on the step and you can't get off, and what you do in that situation, which essentially is ask your passenger to get out and Uber home. But we didn't have that issue this time. And then we had a very adventuresome picnic at Lake Cavanaugh. Here's the route of flight. This is an aeronautical chart. Pete and Bucky look at these all the time. And down at the bottom, I'll see if I can make that happen. Yeah, I'm circling KAWO. That's the designator for Arlington, Washington. That's where we started. And the first stop was Opixie, and Opixie is an intersection on the IFR charts. And right underneath that is Big Lake. And from Big Lake, we flew north and headed toward the south end of Lake Whatcom. And this end of, the lake goes clear up to where the pointer is now and all the way back to here. So we had plenty of room to do landings to here. And then we went up to the Float Haven, and it turns out we intended to be there about an hour after, be there at noon. It started at 11. When we got there, we called in on the radio frequency and found out that all of the landing spots, either the beach or on the seaplane ramp, were all taken up. There wasn't any space. They had some area on the floating dock, but there were other planes there too. And you have to be a really good sailor of a sea craft, because once it's on the water, it's now a boat. And trying to put myself in between other parked planes on the ramp there, or on the dock, I didn't feel comfortable doing that at all. And so we said, okay, we landed, came around, waved at everybody, and then took off. So there's where the plans changed. So now we're up at the seaplane base, and we're taking off, make a left-hand turn, and we come back and said, well, we still got our sack lunch back here. Let's just go to Cavanaugh. So we went over down this direction, then we went to Lake Cavanaugh, where we made another approach. So, which we'll get to in a minute. So another sign that I like: when was the last time you did something for the first time? Think about that. And I take that to heart. And I don't want to be rocking away some many years from now thinking all the things that I wish I had done in my life. So I try to seize the opportunity whenever it comes up. And however, landing at Lake Cavanaugh wasn't one of the things I had really planned to do. And this was the landing, the welcoming at Lake Cavanaugh. So came in from the north. I've made this approach many, many times, and flew down the right-hand side of the lake at what's called a downwind leg. And then we did a left base, which is a turn to the left 90 degrees when we're south of the lake. And then we're coming up toward the lake, headed north again. And my plan was to land in the bottom half of the lake. And I noted on this beautiful day that there was an awful lot more boat traffic there than usual. So there was a lot of boating activity. And as I came in to make the approach, everything was looking good. And we'd already splashed 3 times previous. Don can tell you they were all perfect. He's not here to deny that. At any rate, we came in, and there's something called the sweet spot. And it's when the airplane goes into something called ground effect. And it semi-hovers over as it descends to the water. It just kind of smoothly comes up. And the idea is to find the sweet spot and then just wait. And as you wait, you come down, and what you want to hear on a seaplane landing is, instead of chirp chirp of wheels on concrete, you hear a swishing sound as the floats gently kiss the water. Well, in this instance, they kissed an unseen wave The boating activity on the lake has changed dramatically with these new boats that can sink the back of the boat and create these great big wakes. So wakeboarders can surf behind the boat. Well, the wake that comes out of those are these rolling waves. You've probably seen them before. And when you have more than one of those on the lake and it's an enclosed, confined place, wherever they intersect, the amplitude of the wave is bigger than just the single. So first, you can't see those waves. And second of all, they can gang up on each other and be taller and bigger that you weren't expecting. And so I believe that what happened was I whacked into one of those and bounced into the air. And on the bounce, and we're taught, what do you do when that happens? Well, you add just a touch of power and just hold the attitude and swish down on the second landing. And that's exactly what we did. And as the floats kissed the ground or kissed the water, the left front float mount broke. Now, it broke when it whacked the wave, but that left front float mount holds the front of the left float, of course. So the nose of the airplane descended and tilted to the left, which let the propeller whack into the front of the float, which is altogether not a good deal. So it chopped a big hole in the front of the float, and at that point, and stopped the engine, of course. One of the blades broke off in the float, and I'm looking down at that. And I look over at Don. Don looks over at me, and I said, "Don, this is not a good day." So now the airplane is listing. It wasn't sinking yet. It was listing to the left and down. So Don gets out of the right side and gets on the float, the starboard float, and walks to the back. I climb over out of the cockpit on the same side. So we're both standing on the right part of the float. And everything's happy at that point, except I'm stunned. Well, if you look around, we were surrounded by watercraft the moment this whole thing happened. And you can't really count them there, but there were probably 50 vessels around us. And I lost control of the situation. I had not thought through what I was going to do if I had a salvageable airplane, but was incapacitated on a lake. What was I going to do in that event? Well, I had a paddle and I had some general ideas, but I never really given any thought to what was happening if a float actually gave way like this. And I'd seen how it is handled at Oshkosh, and it's very simple. That two little boats come, one on either side, just gets under a wing and you put off to shore. And had we done that, the event would have been entirely different. And so we got towed over to shore by a variety of vessels, people shouting commands, do this, do that. And I did not retake command and say, wait a minute, let's do it this way. And it was just a matter of not having thought it through, and also being a little bit stunned by what was going on. So at any rate, the airplane gets towed over to the right-hand side, or to the closest shore, which is a couple hundred yards away. And eventually the fire department shows up, and they have a winch on the front of one of the rigs at the Cavanaugh Fire Department, and you can just barely see it up here so they start to tow the airplane, but they were towing it from 90 degrees from the left wing forward, it turns out. So as they pulled it into shore, Cavanaugh has a real steep beach, very little beach and a steep access. Well, the broken left float actually was pulled up on the beach. And then as they pulled it 90 degrees to the beach, it actually tore off the undercarriage, and the starboard float came off too. So as I say, this picture is, I can't begin to tell you how sad this is or expensive. And Pete and Bucky will tell you that this part of the airplane is the most expensive part of the airplane, because that's where all the avionics are located. And I'm in the water trying to keep the airplane from going under. So she danced one minute, she kicked up her heels the next, but landed wrong. And here's a missing prop. The floats have been torn off to the side, and in switching the pole from 90 degrees to get the nose up. The aircraft unfortunately went completely underwater, or the cockpit went completely underwater, submerging all the instruments and the engine and all that stuff, which changed. So it's been said before, it's usually not the incident that is not recoverable. It's what does the damage is the retrieval. And I've heard that from so many people that have looked at these pictures and said, oh man, we feel your pain. So anyway, that's what it looked like on the day that we made the, shoot, there it goes. So when was the last time you did something for the first time? Well, this was certainly a first for me. And not all the time do things go exactly as you plan. And so that would be dawned on me looking at this and, oh, can't believe this has happened. Well, I felt really badly for about, any questions so far at this point? I've got questions and answers to the past. And I don't know if you can unmute everybody if they got any questions. Anybody? I don't hear anything. Okay, well.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, I'm really blown away by this presentation. I consider you to be one of the most cool, collected, amazing people I've ever met.
Thank you.
Like, I'm in tears. Like, this is just an unbelievable thing. I'm so glad that you guys came out safe.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a big deal until I said, well, shoot, what are we going to do now? We're on water with a broken airplane. If it had been, I've blown tires. Every pilot has had to go through issues where you kind of look the evil man in the eye. And it can be from, I've blown a tire before on landing, which is interesting. There's Pete and Bucky, I'm sure everybody's got things they can relate to, but anyway, this wasn't a big deal and we were safe is the bottom line. Where I could have done a whole lot better is if I had been cool and calm and collected and directed the retrieval of the airplane to shore. And I let that get out of hand. And at that point, I just threw up my hands and said, okay, we're safe. We'll get to shore. It's not a big deal. We can replace anything except human lives. So anyway, as I say, when's the last time?
Lee, what was your final approach speed?
Well, it's 57 knots is the best, and it stalls at 38. So you come over the fence at 57 or so, and then you putt along, reducing speed. And you bring in, I think that's Pete talking, and the density altitude that day was about 1,000 feet higher than the actual altitude. So the lake's at 1,300, so the density altitude I'd calculated at 2,300 feet.
Sure.
For those of you not pilots, the density altitude talks about the thickness of the air and or the thinness of the air. And so if you're landing with a high density altitude, the airplane performs differently. And Pete's asking a great question. So anyway, the approach speed is 57 knots and it stalls at 38.
Gotcha.
And everything looked just dandy as I came down on approach and then got to the sweet spot in ground effect and just waiting to touch down on the water. Kapow! We bounced back up into the air. So that's the deal. Sometimes you eat the bear and sometimes the bear eats you. So can I tell the rest of the story? Any other questions, burning questions?
Hey, Lee, what's happened to the airplane now?
Well, I'm not done yet. I'm not done. Geez, what time is it? Anyway, am I behind time? I better look. Well, for 2 days, I was really down in the dumps. You know, how could this possibly happen to me? Because I'm a very compulsive flyer. I take everything very seriously. I do a complete pre-flight every time I fly. And so I had said, God, I just cannot believe that I hit that wave that hard to break a float mount. And so at any rate, I had the float mounts in my hand. I had them with me from day one. We hadn't retrieved the airplane for 4 days. We got it on Thursday. The accident occurred on Sunday, the 16th, and we recovered it on Thursday, the 20th. So anyway, I was really down in the mouth, and I took the pieces and parts over to a machinist friend of mine. I told him what had happened. And he looked at this and he said, well, Lee, this part right here, do you see, can everybody see where I'm circling the golden part on this? This is the end of the float strut that attaches to the airplane. And this is new rust. This is old corrosion that from prior problems. I bought the airplane with 635 hours and put 30 hours on it. So it turns out, here's the other end. This is what is connected to this. Everybody see that? He looked at that and he said, well, this thing's been broken. You were flying around with a strut that was 75% broken to begin with. So suddenly it made a whole lot, at least it made a little more sense that it wasn't all me that caused the problem. And so there's more to this story coming. And look at the next one. The other float mount, which was intact at the time and then got torn off in the retrieval. This is the part right here the golden part is new rust. This is old corrosion and a crack. So the one on the float mount on the right side was at least 10% fractured. So this was already fractured over here, and this is the gold new rust that occurred in 4 days that matches this. This is the right strut. So the long and short of it was the accident, the incident occurred because of me and a structural, me because I was flying, and a structural fracture in the float mount. So I took it to two other, without telling them the story, two other machinist friends of mine looked at this, and they both, without telling them what had happened, they said, well, it's obvious this thing's been cracked and you finished it off. So I felt a little bit better about it, except, and in a moment I'll explain where all this leads. But so we're back to the retrieval stage, and the dude in the water with the yellow hat would be me. And I'm trying to keep this end of the airplane out of the water. Well, the nose is the engine's already under the water. I'm trying to keep this section out of the water, and I was unsuccessful in doing so. Fortunately, of course, the engine was off. All the electronics, all the electricity was off too. So everything was shut down in the airplane. So when it went underwater, it wasn't energized, is the word. And the dude on the shore munching a sandwich is Don. So he's not here to give his side of it, but when we're still 20 feet from shore, so he says, the lunch, let's get the lunch. So he grabs the lunch out of it and goes up to shore, and he's munching on a sandwich. Anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. So despite the lovely sunset on Cavanaugh as we came across the bridge, it was a very quiet and long trip home, is what I will tell you. So in fact, before we got home, let's see here. We went up to Bellingham. We had to go up to Bellingham on an errand with the kiddies and something. So my ride took me to Bellingham and then back home. Well, at Bellingham, we get a call from FEMA, and they call and say, well, Dr. Harman, really sorry to hear about the incident on Cavanaugh. I wonder if you could go back to the airplane and turn off your ELT. The ELT is an emergency locator beacon, which if you're in an accident, it sets off a signal that other airplanes home in on, and it broadcasts on 121.5. And that's something we monitor when we're flying. And if we hear something like that, then we call it in and people come and help. It wasn't on when we were at the airplane, but when it went underwater, it closed the circuit in the ELT panel and set it off. So we didn't know it was going, and so had to run back to the scene of the crime to turn it off. Apparently a lot of Navy jets and commercial airliners are all calling it in to the emergency response group. So despite the lovely sunset on the way home, which was quite spectacular, it was a quiet and very long trip home, as you might imagine. Questions at this point?
Do you have any advice for kayakers that are on the lake?
Well, you ought to have some kind of a flotation device, and you ought to have some kind of a satellite radio or something to call if you need help. You know, if you're out in the middle of nowhere, how are you going to get people to you? If that helps. And stay out of the way.
In regards to, as we kayak on lakes and we see people like yourself landing,
right.
I wonder, are we doing anything that is hindering what they're doing or in their way?
No, rarely. But and the rule of the road is that as an airplane, I have to give way to any vessel on water. So when I'm flying, I have to give way. I cannot hazard anybody else. It's supposed to be 500 feet away or over everybody when I'm flying in. And usually that's the case. You might fly lower than you should over somebody, but that's because of the landing, where you're going to land. But once I'm on the water, I become a vessel, and I have to run by the same rules of the road that any boater uses. So once a seaplane is on water, he's another boat. Now, having said that, for you boaters out there, I mean, the worst thing that happens on seaplane landings is a jet ski guy wants to pop in front of you, or they like to jump over your wake. And they don't realize that once I'm on the water, once I'm on the water, I don't have the maneuverability that I do when I'm in the air. So there's some hazards that can happen there. And in that situation, the only thing I can do is jump the airplane back in the air and go get out of the way so as not to hurt anybody. But probably up at Cavanaugh, the biggest issue getting back to kayaks, they don't realize that that I can't maneuver once a seaplane gets committed. it varies from seaplane to seaplane. My airplane only had one water rudder on one of the floats. If you have two water rudders, and if you have a great big rudder tail, you can maneuver and make a turn much easier. And my airplane, about 100 yards from shore, I'm pretty much committed because my turning radius is larger than 100 yards. And it also depends on the winds and that kind of stuff. So if I make an approach to our place up at Cavanaugh, there's people on what they call the stand-up boards, paddle boards. They're just not looking for an airplane to come in there. And so I've had to break off and approach a couple of times because people just aren't aware that I can't maneuver and I'm headed right for shore and they're headed right where I'm going. So anyway, I hope that helps. So the return to the trip to the airport was 4 days later. We've already taken the wings off. The mechanics from Arlington Airport, this fellow here is Scott Zumwalt, and his cohort is right here, Jim Scott. They run Air Corps facility. Then they specifically take care of the Rotax motors that are on these airplanes, and also they're also light sport specialists. So they knew all about this airplane. And I wouldn't have bought it had I not had them examine it and know the airplane quite intimately. So that we've already taken the wings off, which was an interesting process, and we've disconnected the remains of the floats from the fuselage. And then it just so happened the day that it was the day of the accident actually. It was. Well, there were some people putting in septic systems on the lake, and they have to pick up big heavy loads. But this was bigger and further out than they could reach. So they orchestrated bringing in a great big tractor trailer retrieval unit, the ones you see on Ice Road and all that, these great big rigs. So he came in and had a great big long boom, and the boom had controllable hoists on it so that they could make sure it came up in a level manner. And here it is over here on the left, coming up through the trees. There's also no, the road on this particular part of Lake Cavanaugh is a single lane road. So there wasn't a lot of room to maneuver. And here's the floats and the wings heading back by barge to up to my cabin north of where the incident occurred. And here's what it looked like being loaded on. Mike Zachman loaned us a big flatbed truck, and over at his facility had all kinds of bedding material. So he gave me a whole bunch of foam for it. And this is Bucky over here taking pictures as he always does. And we're loading it up to bring it back to Arlington. And she's now resting comfortably in intensive care. The engine, this is a very, very robust engine. In fact, they use a version of this to fly the Predators that the military uses. It's very, very robust. And whenever you have a prop strike, it's called, you're supposed to tear the engine down. Well, they've done that many times on these engines, and they've like full power takeoff and strike the concrete. They've never had any internal damage to any of these engines. So we didn't have to do a complete engine tear down because mine was at idle speed and popped and it broke the float, or it chopped into the float and broke off the prop. But it wasn't at full power and it wasn't on concrete. So anyway, and the good news was at that point, the engine was out of the water. Number two, it was fresh water. And number three, it was turned off. It wasn't running. It was still hot, but it wasn't running. And by the time it finally did go underwater, it was perfectly cool. And those are all things that mitigate for a good conclusion to getting the airplane, the engine back up and running. So we got it back and we purged all the oil out of it, and put new oil in it. The engine was going to run last week, but it didn't happen. They're going to start it up this week, I think. And we've examined the damage on the hull. There's just some places here that are all repairable. And it turns out that the avionics, all of the Garmin equipment and they all, after 2 weeks, we plugged them in and darn if it didn't work. So it's really quite amazing. If it had been salt water, it would have been a totally different deal. But they were not energized when they went into the water. That helped. And number two is fresh water. So it looks like I've dodged a huge bullet, both engine-wise and avionics-wise. The plane will fly again, although it's going to be on land gear. And the biggest damage was to my ego. And as I say, I feel a little bit better that it wasn't all me because of the fracture of that float strut, which is part 2 of what we're getting into now. So she'll fly again, but on land-based gear. And I would tell you, she just deserved a much better ending than what you're seeing here. But Don and I walked away, and you know, I forgot to mention some qualities of this airplane because it was designed in the Ukraine. It was purchased and then refined by and built in Germany. It's all carbon fiber. It's very light. It has a panel that is the pilots lust over. It's an all-glass panel, which is real special. And it's got the motor, a very reliable motor in the front, a 3-bladed prop. And right back here, there's an exit for a ballistic parachute. So if everything goes to hell in a handbasket, there's a red handle inside, which I don't normally tell anybody about. But anyway, as long as you're 200 or 300 feet in the air and something's not happy, you're in extremis, you can pull that thing and it blasts a parachute 300 feet into the air, and you're supposed to safely glide down to earth. So
Lee,
yeah.
is that parachute made by Softy Parachutes, Dan, over at the airport?
No, I don't know who makes it. It's a specialized, he doesn't do ballistic parachutes, but this one has some kind of a mortar charge or something. It's a rocket actually that shoots this thing up and out. So the epilogue, well, of course, I was asked to write a letter to the FAA and the National Transportation and Safety Board, which is just what you do. And I did all of that. And as I said earlier, they said, well, you know, this is an incident. It'd be like blowing a tire on landing on a land-based airport. We recommend that you not do this again. And I said I wouldn't. And that was the end of their involvement with me. And that's the good news. And it can be real nasty if you've done something wrong. And they never even checked my paperwork. That's what really irritated me. I had all this stuff I always do, but I figured that they'd want to look at it, but they didn't. So what I've done since then, it's become obvious to everybody involved, my mechanics, me, people that know this airplane. It turns out worldwide there may be 12 owners of float-equipped CTLS flight design airplanes. And the manual, and I checked this out, the maintenance manual and the annual condition inspection for the airplane and the floats doesn't say anything about looking at the float mount, which you cannot see without taking the floats completely off the airplane, which is a real big deal. I mean, first of all, you got to hoist the airplane up in the air, and then you got to there's a lot to do to get the floats off and back on. So that has not ever been a part of their maintenance issue or maintenance plan. And so I wrote a letter to Flight Design and Claymore Floats and told them what had happened, and I sent pictures and explained that 3 independent observations of the metal in this thing show that it was fractured a long time before I managed to break it completely through. And wouldn't it be, don't you think it's wise that we contact those other guys and have them look at this? And that's what they're in the process of doing now. We're 3 weeks into the incident, and Flight Design and Claymore are both on top of it. And then also the person that designed, the company that designed the actual mount that mounts to the firewall. That's the piece. I'll put it back. I'd love to have it back on floats. The float is also repairable, even the chopped hole. There's nothing unrepairable. But the long and short of it is, I'm not going to do that until they remanufacture, redesign the mounting system for the front on the firewall mount. So I'm in the middle of writing, making sure that gets done, and that there is a notice that goes out to other people with this airplane and on floats. I think there's only 3 in the United States, and the other 9 are over in Europe somewhere. So 749er Charlie Tango will fly again. Don was a great passenger and remains a good friend, right, Don? So he's not here. He's not here to tell his side of the story, which I was hoping he would be. And then lastly, I've written nobody at the Float Haven fly-in knew anything about this, and I called a 3 days after I had some information and some time to cogitate. I'm generating a letter there's 2 magazines nationally and 1 in the Northwest about seaplane flying, and so I'm generating an article to the Seaplane Pilots Association, which I'm sure they're going to publish, talking about the issues. But more importantly, as a flight surgeon and knowing better, about the issue of not being prepared to take reins to make this thing, take control of the retrieval, which caused all the damage, the majority of the damage. And talk to people about having a plan. You know, you've heard me say before, if you don't have a plan, you'll get there every time. Well, that's exactly what happened on this one. So that, let's see here. And here's one for Bucky. So bottom line is never underestimate an old man who is also a pilot. So that's what I had for the Buckmeister and me, and that's my program. Here we are. Questions, comments, suggestions, worries?
Well,
Hope I've